You don't
But
like
go,
Henry
Go.
Rollins?
I have questions. I have questions about what is happening right now. Welcome to Cult Favorite, the podcast that is not involved in any secret CIA projects that we know of.
Like if we were.
I'm Miranda Simmons.
If we were, would we tell people?
How would we even know? Eventually.
Yeah.
There were lots of people who were parts of these projects that apparently did not know about it or consent to being part of it.
No. And I'm Mike Altman.
Say?
I'm Mike Altman, and I consent to being a part of any CIA projects.
Oh.
Let the record reflect.
I don't know that I don't know about that for me, but I do consent to the conversation that we were about to have, and I'm excited about it because we're finally talking about Charles Manson.
Finally.
Does it feel like a finally to you? I don't know.
It seems like one of the. I feel like Manson. It's one of those things that like I don't know a lot of like academics in religious studies who like do cult stuff or new religious movement stuff who like want to talk about Manson. So it's not something that
they're an academic book on.
I don't know.
We set furiously to Googling.
Yeah.
Anyway,
if you wrote if any, I know there's a lot of academics listening. If you wrote a book about Charles Manson, leave a comment.
We'll have a special episode
and a rating.
We'll interview you. Well, we're talking about Chaos, the Manson Murders, which is the newest. It's the most recent Netflix.
Brand new, yeah.
This year. So what did you know before?
I had a vague pop culture understanding of Charles Manson. I mean, just like, Charles Manson, the pictures,
Sure.
The guy that you would, reference in middle school jokes. But I didn't know.
He's like a greatest hits feature on he's like part of the cult discourse canon.
Yeah.
Right.
And just sort of the general like evil people that get brought up about things, right? But then like, also, the more I learned, about the murders and stuff, it was like he's this sort of like, this sounds weird to say or bad to say, but like it was two murders. There are people who've done way worse stuff who are way less infamous in our minds. So there's also something about him as like this enigma and all of this that
always
rolled
interested
up into it.
In why we tell the stories we do.
Yeah.
So we're gonna get into it. So I think that he was probably one of the first figures that was kind of baked into my own early understanding of something called a cult leader. So I definitely had that like broad storyline that you're talking about. But I remember having a lot of questions, and I continue to have so many questions.
Did you associate him with like Satanism as a younger person, like as a kid when you heard about?
I don't know that I don't know. It was hippie generation evil.
Okay.
I don't know that no, I don't think so. Because Satanism as a concept really solidified for me like in the 80s, about the 80s.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
With the Satanic Panic. But one of my questions about Charles Manson and the family was to do with the race war ideology that he spouted, which really doesn't get a lot of airtime in the discourse about him. I mean, it'll come up and then it'll just kind of like fade away. So we're really way more interested in Sharon Tate because she was a movie star and she was gorgeous and she was married to Roman Polanski. And, that could be the Roman Polanski. Is it called Wanted and Desired or something? Like there's a documentary about Roman Polanski that arguably we could talk about, but
that's one of those people that I know the name and know vaguely, and I'm like, I don't know.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I know people like Roman Polanski. Like,
Michael, did you not watch Rosemary's Baby?
No. Did I watch Rosemary's Baby?
No. Okay. We're gonna get distracted very quickly because I'm shocked and appalled right now. So we will talk about this later. But
yet another example of Mike's sheltered
it's
childhood
okay. No,
appalling
it's
Miranda.
It's fine. Abigail Folger, we care about her because she was, the Folger heiress.
Coffee heiress.
Jay Sebring, we know his name, maybe. I don't know. I mean, depending on like how far down the rabbit hole you get, because like he was the person who introduced like the posh man's coif.
Oh.
to hairstyling culture.
The posh man's quaff.
Yeah, like he did like Frank Sinatra's hair and stuff.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, he was born in Birmingham, by the way.
Oh.
There's your fun trivia fact for the day. Anyway, I'm eager to have a better conversation about Charles Manson, about the family.
The documentary did?
Well, the documentary was very specific because it was based on a very specific book.
Yeah.
So we will anyway. But this is your pick, and so it's your go.
This is my pick.
See if you can you can have a shorter synopsis.
Always trying to stay timely. So I'm like, this is.
Did you set a timer for yourself?
Oh no, I will. I will set a timer.
Did you set one for me last week, and it was embarrassing.
If I can learn how to do it, I will put one on the screen. By the way,
don't do that.
We got the YouTube working.
Yay!
Everyone.
Maybe yay. I don't know.
You can find it. YouTube.com/cultfavoritepod.
To our credit or our detriment. Now you can see us talking about these ideas in real time.
It's going to be great.
It is great.
Help us. Just wait.
Okay. So yeah, I did not stay to my 5 minutes last week. So
I already started.
Or whenever it was.
Yeah. Sorry.
When did we talk? How long has it been?
I don't think we should identify it so people don't know.
We are out of time and space.
Yes, these are all recorded simultaneous, like one after the other.
It could be like British baking show where, you know what I mean? Because they always
have to wear the same clothes every time.
It was the biggest mystery to me for so long until someone finally explained. Yeah, it's because that they can then like use, like video clips to be.
It's the same thing with like.
It made so much sense once it was finally explained, but I did not.
Yeah, that's why Drag Race confessionals always have the same outfit.
Interesting. I didn't think about that either.
Yeah.
I'm learning so much.
Yeah. So
this peek behind the curtain.
People give us villain edits based on this. All right.
Okay.
5 minutes.
Go.
Okay. So what gets covered? The question. This is a driven by a central question. Why did these women go along with Manson and commit these crimes? Like, how was Charles Manson able to convince these young women to murder mercilessly?
Young men too.
But they really were interested in one of the young women.
They certainly
the accepted narrative of the Manson family murders and a few possible alternative theories involving the CIA and FBI is understood by writer Tom O'Neill. So Tom O'Neill has a book, came out in 2019, called Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s.
And this documentary is just called Chaos. The Manson Murders.
Yeah, because that's too long. Some Netflix executive was like, no.
But it is a direct...
No, it's literally
it is this book.
The book started as an article for Variety, I want to say, or something like that.
The reason that you're not going to get to 5 minutes is really because of me. I'm just going to own that right off the bat because I'm going to ask you who directed this, Michael.
Errol
Morris.
Is
that a name that you knew?
Yes. What did he do that I knew?
The Thin Blue Line.
That's what it was.
The Thin Blue Line is like a film that helped shape the documentary form as we know it.
Yeah, this one is not that.
It's really interesting. Anyway. Okay. So Errol Morris, though, is a person who is interested in asking questions about like the broader kind of situational framework that might inform a story that we tell. This one is very much an interview with Tom O'Neill and his version of this.
Yeah.
But Errol Morris plays an interesting part in it.
Well, he does. And he's actually, I don't know that he's convinced by the end. We can circle back to that.
We'll circle back to that. Okay.
So what's not in the film is all sorts of alternative possibilities don't really add up to a full-fledged alternative narrative. So there's a kind of just a lot of, and there's no larger kind of context. If you don't know much about these murders or the Manson story, you probably, like, for me, who hadn't watched the Charles Manson documentary before.
Ever. Any of them?
No.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
There was a lot of, like, having to go Google and I wanted that bigger context and stuff. So, yeah, I actually spent a bunch of time this morning while I was answering emails, listening to Charles Manson's songs that are on YouTube or on Spotify.
Interesting.
So, okay, we have 6 chapters and it's divided up into 6 chapters.
Yes.
The first chapter is called Release, and right before they call the chapter 1, O'Neill sort of introduces the central question: why did these women do this? How did Manson get control of them? And we get a quick summary of the murders that involving the one with Sharon Tate, Roman Polanski, and 3 others.
Well, it didn't involve Roman Polanski. He was out of the country.
Yes,
but
that's right. Sorry. And then a night later at the La Bianca's house, the couple. And then O'Neill also introduced these government scientists who were studying mind control, specifically Jolly West, which is just a remarkable character. A scientist studying LSD in youth and had a lab hidden as a health clinic in Haight-Ashbury in the mid-60s in San Francisco.
The health clinic was legit, wasn't it? Like there was a health clinic,
I think it was,
but then Jolly West was kind of using that as his front or whatever.
Which also had a parole officer's office in it for some reason.
Well, and I think, that the reason that this, at least my read, was that this chapter is called Release because Manson had just been released from prison.
And he was released from prison. He went to Berkeley. Where did he go first? Berkeley first, one place, and then he went up to San Francisco, and they sort of transferred his case to a different parole officer up there. And we also get an introduction to the CIA program MKUltra, which was trying to make mind-controlled programmed assassins that would, there's all this Manchurian Candidate.
Sure.
Another movie I haven't seen.
Wow.
I feel like I saw, wasn't there a remake of it? I saw the remake.
Yeah, sure.
I think I saw the remake.
But, yeah. Okay.
But they were, 20 years, $15 million testing LSD.
Literally 20 years, 53 to 73.
Yeah.
This is a long program.
Had their records destroyed in 1973. Jolly worked for this program, and the only connection, I kept waiting for more, that they could get between Jolly and Manson was that Manson's parole officer was in the same office as Jolly's clinic. So that's sort of the setup, and we get the story of 5 minutes is up.
You've only made it through chapter 1.
Yep.
Okay, I'll stop interrupting.
No, you're fine. It's good. Good.
Go.
Manson was chapter 2 is music, and this was one of the most interesting parts to me was Manson wanting to make it as a musician, being not bad, honestly, as a musician.
Sure.
Michael Ullman did not say Charles Manson not bad, honestly.
Don't splice that one.
Ended up with Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys. Met Terry Melcher, a producer, wanted Melcher to sign him.
Yep.
And part of this is going to lead to why the murders happened. The house with Sharon Tate was because we'll find out later that used to be where Melcher lived.
Right.
Wilson stealing a Manson song that the Beach Boys recorded for $300. Well, not stole. They gave him $300, but not published, no licenses, et cetera.
No credit.
Melcher didn't sign him. And then we get Bobby Beausoleil. It's a great name. We get him introduced as someone who was trying to help with the Manson produced demos and things.
He was Dennis Wilson's friend. He was the one who introduced Dennis Wilson to the family.
And Bobby also gets involved with a drug deal with bikers that goes sideways. The bikers, I found out later, were there. It's very convoluted, and they don't do a great job unpacking this. But the bikers were brought there by Manson as security for the property of the Spawn Ranch, this old
movie set
ranch they were living in. And so all of this leads to basically Bobby killing a guy named Gary Hinman, who was the one that Bobby got the drugs from that he tried to sell to the bikers. The bikers had a bad trip on and then tried to come after Bobby. And then Manson gets involved and tells Bobby Bobby kills Hinman, and Manson says to make it look like the Black Panthers did it. Hence the writing political piggy and a paw print in blood at the scene of the crime. And Bobby's arrested Bobby's arrested a couple weeks later, and then the next day is when the Tate murders happen.
Yeah.
And then we get chapter 3, Murders, which I subtitled, Let's Go to Conspiracy Town.
I don't like that trip, but go. Let's do it. Let's go. I'm your passenger.
Here we go.
Yes.
So another drug deal gone wrong leads Manson to shooting a guy named Bernard Lots of Papa Crow. And Manson thinks he killed him and thinks he's a Black Panther because he kind of is dressed like one, apparently. And this also involves a fella named Tex Watson, who
was a member of the family.
And had orchestrated the deal. And Manson thinks that Tex Watson is going to snitch on him. So he makes Tex make text complicit in an illegal action. It's this sort of, they talk about this as kind of incarcerated logic of like, if someone's going to snitch on me, then I need to get them implicated so that I have something on them and they have something on me.
Yeah.
And actually, a lot of this, one of the things that kind of goes unmarked is the ways that like incarcerated social norms structure how Manson sees the entire world in terms of who belongs to who. Like someone is always in somebody else's custody. There's one point where he talks about one of the women, and he says like he talks about, I think it's about all of them, like before they belong to me, they belong to their parents, they belong to the cities, the schools, they belong to their teachers. Like, and in his head, it's sort of everyone is incarcerated to somebody in this interesting way,
right?
Or this way,
yeah.
Anyways, so the Stephen K, the prosecutor, then one of the prosecutors, then gives this lengthy sort of beat by beat account of the Sharon Tate and LaBianca murders. O'Neill comes in to connect Jolly West. This is where we start to get to Conspiracy Town. The scientist to Jack Ruby, the man who killed Lee Harvey Oswald, who was, of course, the assassin of John F. Kennedy. Because you can't have a trip to Conspiracy Town without an appearance of John F. Kennedy's assassination. Who West claimed, so West was the psychologist who saw Ruby. Ruby never testified in his own trial, but was going to testify before the Warren Commission. West was the doctor sent in to evaluate him the day before and came out and said that he had gone insane and could not testify, and he never did testify before the Warren Commission.
Somehow that day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To which O'Neill thinks that one of the things that West was trying to discover in his research was how to induce insanity in people. And so points to this as a possibility. Then we get to chapter 4, Capture, and this is about the arrests. And this is where we get a little more of O'Neill's conspiracy theory. Well, I say conspiracy theory. Explanation. Who am I? Who am I to call it a conspiracy theory?
His thing is like, yeah, like if the government was invested in trying to make these experiments wherein people were manipulated into thinking, remembering, doing all sorts of things that are not already part of their gray matter, and that Manson is utilizing some of the same techniques and some of perhaps the same drugs, and perhaps came into contact with one of the people in charge of one of those missions, well, then it stands to reason that Manson, like this is one explanation. It's an explanation.
So, right. So he starts with Susan Atkins, one of the women involved in the family who's involved in the murders, who was arrested, and blabs the whole story of the murders to her cellmates, who O'Neill claims were plants.
I found this part of the discussion very frustrating, but we can get to that later.
Okay.
Yes.
Anyways. Then they give Atkins a new lawyer that has, quote, more control over their clients. The idea being that basically the prosecutors are getting her a lawyer that will be easy for the prosecution to work with. And as O'Neill says, the whole story is very managed as it goes to the media.
Right.
We then get a kind of side quest to talk about COINTELPRO, the 1967 FBI operation, and Chaos, the 1967 CIA operation, that were both meant to kind of infiltrate left-wing groups, especially the Black Panthers. And Beausoleil says that it's really just simple that Charlie wanted to kill Mitchell but didn't know he'd moved. And so there's a way that Beausoleil is often the...
Terry Melcher, the producer.
The producer.
Okay.
But Beausoleil often offers... Because they have Morris interviewed him over the phone, and he kind of just comes in to sort of push back on O'Neill. And so he says, like, he wanted to kill Mitchell, and then he wasn't there, and he got the wrong one. All right. Chapter 5 is about the trial. And the women, they talk about the women sort of mimicking and following Manson. Manson sort of, quote unquote, mesmerized the girls with isolation and LSD. A lot on Manson's charisma, the way he relied on the Beatles' White Album and his interpretation of Revelation 9. the prosecutor says that, gives us the race war theory, which Vincent Buglione, who wrote the book Helter Skelter that popularized the accepted narrative that includes this race war theory. I mean, he says it coming out of the courtroom at the end of the case.
Yes.
He is sort of brought into the story now. O'Neill says that the girls might have believed Helter Skelter, but not Manson. Beausoleil says that Bugliosi knew that it wasn't about race war, but that he wanted to sell books, and talks about how Bugliosi had a note taker who was already working on the book during the trial in the courtroom.
I thought that was O'Neill. Maybe it doesn't matter. But yeah, O'Neill doesn't really buy that as a theory either. That the race war that Charlie Manson talked about to his followers was not really the centerpiece of a story to tell about Charles Manson.
Right.
That maybe that was part of his rhetoric, but that was not part of his motivation, nor was it part of his tactics.
A whole thing about what did Manson really believe, that's sort of up in the air. 42 and a half hours of deliberation, and they're all found guilty in all counts. Then we get to chapter 6, mind control, conspiracy town, population, Tom O'Neill. So the question of the whole into the film here is how did Manson learn to brainwash people?
Sure.
And O'Neill says that he was being used by the state. Talks about his fascination with Scientology, that he used, and so O'Neill's argument is that he used LSD to make sort of lasting personality changes in the women in the family that he says sort of lasted even after, that they had, many of them, the ones who went to prison, it was after they were in prison for a number of years that they started, and talks about them being deprogrammed.
Yeah.
He points to a report he got his hands on from Charlie West that says that he was successfully able to place false memories in people without them being aware of it, allegedly. And then the thing ends with, the Bobby Beausoleil kind of gets the last word, and he's no one understands, as he says, how not a mastermind Charlie was, how much he was just making it up and flubbing things as he goes, and that they want it to be more complicated than it is. That's kind of where it leaves us.
Well,
with even Morris pushing back on O'Neill by the end.
Yes. But there isn't, but it doesn't get picked up and taken somewhere. It is really just this kind of, Morris presents this documentary as an explication of O'Neill's theory, the evidence that he has to support it, but he doesn't want to go, O'Neill doesn't want to go to the place where he says categorically, this is what happened. Because when he says so do you think that this was orchestrated? He's I wouldn't say that, because that suggests that the government planned it and did this kind of had this strategic thing. But so we get that implicitly as the narrative that gets the most time and space. Beausoleil at the end, I'm glad that you ended there, because that is very much the first thing that I want to talk about, because I think that he is absolutely right. Here was his full quote, the Bobby Beausoleil. The problem with this story in particular is that people are very fond of their fantasy. They don't want to hear how mundane this story is, how not a mastermind Charlie actually was. In his paranoid delusions and his miscalculations, it was just blunder after blunder after blunder. And then this is when Morris, offers people want their conspiracy theories or whatever. And he's yeah, they do. They want it to be more complicated than it is. And it's so hard to disabuse people from those fantasies. And I think he's right about that. Yeah. I don't actually have a problem with the O'Neill story getting presented. I think absolutely that inside of MKUltra and COINTELPRO and the CIA's chaos program, lots of shady stuff was going on.
Yeah,
we know this, and I don't have a problem believing at all. I don't find it controversial at all to say that there were mind control experiments that were happening, that like I don't find that necessarily like out there and fanciful. What I do think is implicitly part of that idea, though, or what comes in tow or like in the back door or something, is that, again, you know, it keeps us, like with so many of the stories that we tell about, you know, quote unquote cult leaders and cult groups, is that we don't spend a lot of time thinking about the exceptionalism narratives that we perpetuate by virtue of the stories that we tell.
Right.
So, you know, I think that I think what's scary about someone like Charles Manson is that he's a regular dude. Like,
yeah.
And I think that whether you are talking about him as this charismatic cult leader or as a, you know, puppet of the state, or as a manipulator of young women, or as what all of those things do, and what they share in common that I think is intensely problematic, is that it creates the idea of Charles Manson as this thing impossibly removed from human behavior that is normal. And so we want to make it make sense,
right,
by creating these exceptionalism narratives that rationalize things.
Yes.
So the girls were from dysfunctional homes and he was an ex-convict and they were druggies or whatever. But like the contents of those narratives that we use to rationalize things are pretty mundane too. Yeah. Shitty families, lots of drugs, dysfunctional relationships.
Yeah.
Like,
well, and there's like two things that I think that raises, like, so one is thinking about Manson in comparison to Kai, the hatchet wielding hitchhiker, in the fact that there are these interesting kind of inverses where like Manson wants to be a musician, he wants to be famous. He's, you know, like I don't know when the cover was designed and made, but the fact that the Lies album, that Beausoleil helped him make, looks like Life magazine. It's like a Life magazine cover of him. I think that sums up a lot. And then whereas Kai, also a drifter, also have his you know, these moments, like, is not wanting to be like, no, I don't want to be like, I don't know, you know. And so there's like, but from another level, this is what we've come back to again and again, like, there's no no one says that Manson is an example, or the family is an example of all of the failures of the system that become evident in this moment in American history.
Yes, the only person who says that is Charles Manson, which is a big problem, because it's like, true. Yeah, that's, you know, at the very end where he's like, I performed what you wanted me to perform. And then, like, you know, of course he goes into his like, nobody would be here if it weren't for me, like whatever, his kind of like self-God speak or whatever. But like that whole idea of there is a I am playing a part in a story that you created, is or that a system created, or whatever. Don't blame me for your children.
Right. Yeah.
Lots of people had access to them before I did.
Yeah.
Is not wrong. So while I like absolutely he's it's not a like, so really it makes sense in a way that like downplays the horror.
No. Yeah.
At all for a single second. I think it is to amplify the horror of the everyday.
Yeah.
And what kinds of things we let pass by and we don't recognize as horrific because they don't have the same kind of like eccentricities that we want to attach to this nutty character who like carves
or the same I mean, the same marketability, right? Like a huge piece of this is the amount of, like, I would be curious because I went to Charles Manson's discography on Wikipedia, and there's been a number of records released.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Like all the way up until like.
How many songs does he have though?
Well, a lot of them are repackaged stuff, like stuff that was released on vinyl that gets repackaged and put out on CD.
Yeah.
But then there's recordings that were done in prison in the 80s that he did. There's a recording that Henry Rollins of Black Flag did with him.
So what's your point about this? Because I don't want to like steamroll and make, because I have a question about this. But what was interesting to you about that?
So yeah, and to finish the Henry Rollins story,
yes.
It was pressed. There were five discs pressed, and then it was too controversial. And apparently Rollins owns 3 of them, and no one knows where the other ones are.
Sure.
So if anyone out there has the Henry Rollins produced Charles Manson album, but my point,
and burn it immediately. I'm so not interested.
You don't like Henry Rollins?
Go. I have questions. I have questions about what is happening right now.
All of that is to say that you don't like Henry Rollins.
Go. I have questions. I have questions about what is happening right now.
All of that is to say that prosecutor wrote the book that became the made-for-TV movie. Like there was and that this happened in Hollywood the way it did. There was so much money to be made off the myth of Charles Manson.
Sure was.
That
sure is.
Yeah, that like I mean, that like so there's no I think that there's no reason to it can't be mundane, right? Like there's no one wants to spend money on that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so like the real conspiracy is I think the ways that like that everydayness is ignored or whatever in order to render this product. The real conspiracy is capitalism.
The product I find so because so if there is a whole like set of releases of all of these songs, I have instant questions about like who's producing them, who's making the money on them.
Yeah.
And if you are using the murder of 7 people to make some money because this guy's guitar chords were kind of neat, fuck you. Like I have no, like, what is that? I mean, I know.
And one of them was like live at San Quentin. It's sort of like that's the recordings that they did in the 80s when he was in there.
But it's interesting music because he killed these people.
Yes.
Like Terry Melcher's whole thing was like, hey man, you're cool. Your songs are rad. Like he does sound like, I was trying to, I don't know. He's got this kind of, it does sound like something that could have been released and marketed in the 60s as part of this like hippie folky kind of vibe. He does make like some chord progressions and like some rhythm changes that are familiar to like pop music at of the day that was pretty popular.
Yeah.
But like Melcher, when he like goes out and visits with the family and hears him play his songs, is like, hey man, you're cool, your music's cool. Thinking as a producer though, I don't really know what to do with you. I don't really have like he couldn't kind of like create a shtick for him.
Yeah.
And so that's why he didn't give him a contract. It's why he didn't feel like he could sign him with a label. And so now what makes him have a shtick, what makes him marketable with a label is the fact that he's a murderer and or coerced people into murder or whatever. And it's like that's grim. Well, that's really bleak, Henry Rollins. Yeah. Like I respect or whatever as for your own musicianship, but that's pretty grim.
There's also another timeline where, because he did write at least one, I guess it wasn't a hit song, but one song that was good enough to get
covered by the Beatles.
The Beach Boys.
Or Beach Boys.
Yeah. But like,
the Beatles were very important to him as a formative. Yes.
But there's a world wherein he actually gets that song published and has rights to it and is getting royalties.
Sure.
That like, that could have been a break.
It could have been.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a whole, and I don't know. That just, to me, it's just like, that's like a whole nother trajectory that could have changed a lot of things. I don't know.
Sure. No, sure. I
guess that's what's for someone who doesn't know much about Manson outside of this documentary and what
I'm glad you don't. That's really interesting. And it's surprising to me.
It raises a lot of questions about like, well, it just picks up with him getting out of jail.
Yeah.
And it's just like, well, I have so many questions.
Oh, I mean, go down the rabbit hole, my friend. Like the influence of Scientology on him.
Yeah.
I mean, he read the How to Win Friends and Influence People book. That was a big deal. So there are all sorts of like, little prelude moments that people will pick up on and kind of, pull on this thread or that thread as like, this helps explain or that helps explain. And maybe it all does help explain. Again, I don't.
That's the other thing. The other thing about the music that came, like, so the documentary says at the beginning, like, it features the music of Charles Manson, and so throughout the documentary, the music is in the background. They always have this like, they have this shot of a record player, and I was trying to see like, they have a record player with with an album on it, and it's got this particular picture of his face that does not look like what you would put on an album that was pressed in 1960 something or 70 something. So I don't know how much that was like a worked album, but like, there's this idea that the art of that somehow the music or the thing Manson says on the recordings is like a window into him or what happened, and so there's this really interesting like connection assumed between sort of the art and the artist, if you want to call Manson that, and then his violence and his psychology that is never really, it's just kind of like gestured towards, or it's kind of like put in front of you as a sort of knot of things to think about, and they never take the time to like ask anybody like, well, how do we make, like, there's no engagement with it within the larger frame of the story. It's just this sort of like half psychoanalyzed example of stuff. And I don't know. It just, the songs become almost a cipher for whatever story you want to tell. Just like Manson himself becomes a cipher for whatever story you want to tell.
And in the process, whatever story you tell ends up, I think, becoming a story of, rationalization by way of exceptionalism. Right. And so whether that's because of the CIA, whether that's because of drugs, whether that's because of, cult behavior, whether that's because of abuse, it all becomes something that takes him out of, a Tuesday where a really, really like terrible set of choices.
They don't say anything about like that. The other thing was like the La Bianca murders are just like they were driving around thinking about killing somebody. It's like that's it.
I mean,
like,
that might have been true, but that's again, like that's because if it's random and it's like there's a nice house, whatever. That's not a good story. Right. You know what I mean? But like that is also 2 lives snuffed out.
Yeah.
But it's not a movie star, and so it doesn't get the same kind of airtime. What also does not get a lot of airtime in, you're quite right to say that the book Helter Skelter does sort of articulate this race war that Charles Manson propagated as an idea among his followers. So I don't know much about this podcast, but there is a good 2-parter on a podcast called Truer Crime by Celicia Stanton that goes into the idea of like the way that the Black Panthers get scapegoated. That whole process, that whole like element of the dynamic that was going on within the family is something that I just feel like is kind of breezed past. So while it gets some time in Helter Skelter, for sure, one of the reasons that I appreciated like her work on the Manson murders is because she really digs into that, that element. And I think that the reason we don't spend a lot of time on the ways that the Black Panthers were scapegoated just from start to finish of this story is reflective of the predominantly, perhaps exclusively, at least in this documentary, white storytellers of this narrative. Like it's reflective of a white storytelling like bundle of stereotypes regarding criminality in the US, regarding like relationships to the government, like, and I think that that's why it doesn't get a lot of time, and I think that it deserves a lot more time.
Yeah, especially in contrast to which, less than a decade later, Jonestown and the Jonestown doc we watched, where you had a number, because there were so many Black people involved in the People's Temple, and you had a number of interviews and heard from people who were not white about that story. And so it really, I think, was a big contrast there, right? Now, granted, everyone other than, I guess, lots of Papa, but everyone involved in this is all, white people, which is which just raises a whole lot of other interesting questions about how we tell the story and what's going on, like you're talking about.
Totally.
But, yeah. I mean,
yeah.
No, go ahead.
Well, Fred Hampton was killed that December.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's a really good point. I didn't think about that.
And like,
I guess that's maybe that documentary is out there, because like I said, I haven't watched any Charles Manson documentaries, but the documentary that sees this as the media phenomena and can put it into that kind of context, I think would be really interesting. Because like what kept coming back to me as I was watching this was, did you ever watch Dragnet?
Sure.
The original Dragnet?
Yeah.
Did you ever watch the Blue Boy episode?
No.
Okay. It's this.
I don't know.
This is my favorite Dragnet episode as a kid. I love this episode because it was.
I know the 3-2-1 contact spoof of Dragnet. Mathnet.
I love Mathnet. Oh my God. Love Mathnet.
That's a deep cut. Okay, yes, go. Anyway, about the Blue Boy.
Square One TV. Blue Boy, he's like this like hippie guy who takes LSD and his face is all painted, and it's just like, and of course runs into, the very clean cut cops or whatever. I don't remember the entire plot. It's just in my brain. But like there's the role that the role that the story plays, and they get at this a little bit, but like in the larger understanding of like what's happening and the demonization of the hippie movement and the kind of new left general that comes out of all of this, that like if your kids become hippies or if your kids have anti-war politics, then they will like fall under this spell. And it's this thing where like you said earlier, like Manson's right that like there's lots of people that had them before me, and so the system is just as controlling. Like the lawyers control Atkins the same way that Manson controlled her. They isolate her. They surround her with particular, with these plants. But and that there's no differentiation about sort of what the ends of these are and how it's going on. Like all of that. There's something about like the sort of social location and the way it fits into the larger moment that I think is like really interesting. And it's probably out there. I'll have to go find it. But wasn't in this one.
Here's some more if you just want more from that. I mean, like the Tate LaBianca murders happened in early August. Like a week before that was when the moon landing happened.
Okay.
A week after that, like mid-August, is when Woodstock happened. And I don't.
Okay.
I say that only to say that, like, in the larger, just I don't know, space of what was going on in the U.S. in that moment, where the government and racism and violence and the hippie movement and the anti-war movement and like where all of those things create some kind of crucible, vortex, I don't know. But like there is a larger structure of the government in relation to violence and surveillance.
Yeah.
That Charles Manson belongs to, whether or not you buy Tom O'Neill's theory. I guess is my point. There was a lot happening inside of these contexts, these structures.
Those are the structures that make Charles Manson possible, right? Like it's like that's the other side, is like whether or not he was a product of the CIA and the FBI directly, or whether or not he was a product of Jolly and MKUltra, he was a product of that swirl you're talking about.
Of someone who felt like it was legit to scapegoat the Black Panthers for something. For murder.
Yeah.
For murder.
Right.
Like that. I think Charles Manson is always possible because people can always commit horrendous acts of violence against other people. You know what I mean? So like, I don't want to say, I would be slow to say that like something in particular created, I mean, I know I'd be slow to say that something in particular created him, because I think that I think that intersubjective human behavior created him.
Right.
But it's where people do not have access to basic human needs that then make a particular figure really compelling. The point about Jim Jones, if I do not have access to affordable housing or, food stability, or like absolutely someone who can offer me food and shelter and healthcare is going to be someone I want to hang out with. And I think that Charles Manson very much offered a space where people felt like they were plugging into something that, their parents couldn't understand. And many of them had been kicked out by their parents and had so it's not to say though, but then I think that the tricky bit becomes like where you presented with that data, and then a person would then like want to say, well, it's because of the dysfunctions of the American family.
Right.
Like, it's like, I mean, sure. Like that dysfunction is not the exception. It's the, like,
that's the, okay. So
that's the water we swim in,
right?
As like how our expectations of, anyway.
It was interesting to that point, sort of that point. It was interesting watching this documentary in our current moment, and then hearing you just now sort of create that timeline, of that sort of contextual timeline of like space travel, these sort of seemingly random horrendous murders, and everything that Manson and the family, the anti-war movement,
Woodstock is
Woodstock, all
literally
that,
like a week later.
Like, it makes me feel better in a weird way, because it's like, oh, like the shitstorm's normal. The moments that it doesn't feel like a shitstorm are the islands, right? Like,
or it's the exception that proves the rule or something. And I don't know that that's good. I'm glad that I don't know how I feel about it. I don't know that I find it heartening, but I do think that like it is heartening to put human behavior into a larger context of human behavior, and to see that like, okay, this is how people respond to things.
This is how rapid social and technological change always leads to stuff like this.
To moral panics.
Yeah.
To like, yeah.
And so, and so
lots of things.
I find that reassuring.
Okay.
I don't know.
Good. Like, no, yeah. I mean, like, I do think that it is, I think it is reassuring to remember and to remind ourselves and each other that if we think that we are living in, if we think that anything is new,
Yeah.
It's because that you've never had to be exposed. You've never felt precarious enough.
Yeah.
You've never felt under threat.
Yes.
And if you think that the way that if you think that harm is something unusual, then it should be unusual. But I think it's an exception that proves a rule about the ways that insecurity, structurally or otherwise, begets harm.
Yeah.
And perpetuates it.
Yeah. It's interesting.
And creates cycles.
I don't know if this
harm.
Yeah. No, I don't know if this will make any sense to people listening to it, but it'll make sense to me. So, but we had Suzanne Van Goons come and speak in our department about, and she was talking about
postdoctoral scholar up at Princeton.
Yes. And her work is on these pickup artists in the early 2000s, right? And I had a few students go to the talk for extra credit. And I was asking about it in class afterwards, like, what did you pick? And what was funny was they said, one student, a couple of them said this, like, I didn't realize that there was a manosphere back then. Like, they thought that Andrew Tate was
that
new.
was a new, yeah.
And it's like, and they're like, I did not realize that there was a cycle to this, and that this is how. I was like, yeah, like, yes, and this is why I'm glad. Like, which great, like that's what they're here to learn, is to recognize that.
No, 100%, and also though too, like that's also arguably like the culture of Mad Men. You know, like that's a manosphere.
Yes.
And so it's just that our language changes and our terminology evolves. But we should not mistake new terminology for new phenomena. Yeah. Like what is old is new again, always and forever.
No, that makes sense.
Is that our takeaway?
No. Well, what do you have it? We didn't even talk. I just wanted to highlight the fact that they call these women girls the entire documentary.
I think that's I think that is something to know.
What's going on with that as far as the rendering of them as completely agentless?
100%. Part of it is because Charles Manson called them his girls. So part of it is like, I think just a reproduction of that language. But a problematic reproduction, perhaps. We do not need to dig in to, the semi-prostitute category that Tom O'Neill introduces. I did not in relation
because he knows
to
her, he said, and that just flew
she's a
right
friend
by.
of mine.
Yeah.
These are the cellmates. He's talking about the cellmates that Susan Adkins told her story to after she was arrested. The link, the transition from her telling her story to these cellmates to what was the broader point about her lawyers coercing her and manipulating her in these different ways was a bad transition, man. Like, I did not understand the context of like, so how does her relationship to these women and the story that she I mean, I get it. Why her telling other people her story then creates a problem for her legal case, blah, blah, that then creates an opportunity that but
I think his argument was that these women
were planted.
Were, quote, semi-prostitutes, meaning that they could have been paid to go sit in there and get the story out of her.
I think it was, maybe.
Or were somehow negotiated
the fact
to
that
do that.
we even have different readings on it or that different readings are even possible is part of what I find, oh my gosh. I think that it was like they were planted there because they were married to the same guy that then, I don't know, like that they were being used to.
Yeah. It's what a lot of the O'Neill stuff is, where there's no, the connections are missing. Like he even says, I can't put Manson and Jolly in the same room
at any point. Yeah,
and,
that's true.
But I brought that up because I wanted to plug, you put in the notes, because I was saying, like, I would love to find out, like, there's nothing on these women. I did find Patricia Krenwinkel, who I think was involved in the LaBianca murders, but not the Tate murder, but
she's one of the family.
Right, yeah. There's a 2014 documentary about her, but it's I don't think it's streaming anywhere. I was just but you said there's a 2019 doc, Manson, the Women, streaming on Peacock. So that might be.
It does seem like it is a NBC special report kind of thing.
Yeah. Like a Dateline or something.
Kind of. So there will be like, yeah, but yeah. it does spend time interviewing them. Anyway, yeah.
All right.
I'm going to refrain from talking about it since we are.
Okay.
We're just talking about one documentary here, but yeah, there is something. My takeaway is always my takeaway, but that's good, right? That means that there's a theme, there's a through line.
Yeah.
The call is coming from inside the house, everybody.
Yeah.
And so and also like so yeah, like Manson was mundane. I think that my takeaway is Beausoleil's takeaway, and as ever, you know, I think context is really underrated and deserves some paying attention to.
When you say Manson is mundane, if there wasn't Charles Manson, I guess my wonder is like, for this in this moment, wouldn't there gonna have to be a Manson, like with everything, with all of the anxieties and fears being churned up by what was happening and by these young white kids around, in San Francisco. Eventually, there had to be yes, and there were lots. You know what I mean? Right, but only one got to be Manson.
But perhaps because the people that he killed were famous,
right,
and rich, and even the LaBiancas were living in a Ponzi neighborhood that was very posh, and like.
Because there was no freak out when Gary Hinman gets killed, is murdered, and has the exact same language written on the wall. No one gives a shit.
So like I want to make very clear that when I say Manson is mundane, that is not to say that he's not a horrendous example of the worst that human beings have on offer in relation to how they can inform other people and how we connect with other people. Like it's not to say that it's not, I don't want to take anything away from the thing itself. It is to say that thing itself, that horrendous, like the worst that we have on offer as humans, is on display pretty frequently, I think. And that it's just the ones that make news, the ones that become ciphers, like you were saying, for these bigger moments of our cultural consciousness.
Right.
That cultural consciousness, I think, gets organized around what we find compelling, what we find charismatic. And then we punish and like lambast the people who found him compelling in the first place, as if they were these hippie rubes who were just drugged into manipulation. Where it's like, I mean, we're telling a story about him because we find him charismatic.
I keep thinking, I do keep thinking about the Patrick Whitney hitchhiking Kai, because if Kai's video doesn't go viral, but he still kills the man, and
we would never have heard. Well, and we didn't really hear about, like, I don't know that a lot of people know that he's in prison.
No, I didn't know about to the documentary. I didn't know about to the documentary to that point, right? So
because we stopped following him as soon as he stopped following our script,
right,
for fame and money and fortune.
Which, to go back, is what Manson says. I followed the script that you were, y'all wanted me to do this, and also, like, I was also thinking about this, like, how many there's all of these prison interviews that he does with various news sources. He also knew the script and knew how to play it in order to remain, in a weird way, relevant, in a way that, like, no one's interviewing. Like, there are multiple people who have had high profile cases and gone to jail, but we don't ever hear from them again. Like, I mean, or if the murders are happening,
again, to people who are not white and rich, like,
But I'm saying, once he got that foothold into the media, he actually did things to
granted
continue to play that
interviews
script.
And
he didn't have to. I mean, he could have not, right? Like,
but people are still releasing the music as a result. So, good for him. which is exactly the problem. It's like, anyway.
My takeaway is I walked into a cult documentary and found a conspiracy theory documentary.
Mm-hmm.
And
potato.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I was going to ask if you found this convincing, and I don't think you did. Maybe
like I don't know.
Maybe they might.
I don't know that
doesn't matter.
Not to me, but there are lots of things that do matter to me that I'm sure categorically unimportant to other people. So I do not want to I'm not being like holier than thou. I don't know that. I think what I find interesting is the quest to explain Charles Manson in whatever way we try to explain it.
But it also makes sense to me because I think cults and conspiracy theories, the things we label cults and conspiracy theories are, I think, related in a lot of ways, both in terms of like the way we use that term to, put something off, it's wrong belief or wrong religion or bad whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But also the way that even for the people inside these groups or inside these ways, these ideas, they're both often predicated on this idea of like, we get it and no one else does.
Yeah.
Like, we've got the real secrets.
Yep.
I've got it all figured out and you don't. And, I think of like QAnon as the kind of like contemporary example of where these things kind of run right into each other, of sort of conspiracy theory and cult.
Mm-hmm. But this is also where this is how we sell like self-help books too. You want to know the secret that nobody wants you to know about how to be a millionaire or whatever. Like as if that is as if the thing that it's how books are sold.
Yeah. No,
it's conspiracy theory, but it's also like, yeah.
Here's the secret. Yeah.
Like the book literally called The Secret.
The Secret, which is about an ages-long conspiracy theory.
Ew.
Yeah. So, what's your cult favorite?
Okay, my cult favorite. I had a couple in my head a little while ago as you were talking that you made me think of, actually, but now I've forgotten them. So I'm just going to revert to maybe while you give yours, I'll think of another. But I have really been enjoying the Residence.
Okay.
Has that come up in your like queue or whatever? It's a show on Netflix.
Our queues are very different, Miranda.
Okay. Well,
no, it hasn't come up. Maybe
it's the amazing Uzo Aduba.
Okay.
I think she's just tremendous, and it's like but Giancarlo Esposito is in it too. Like, I don't know. But also Kylie Minogue makes a very important cameo, and it's a lot of fun. It's a murder mystery whodunit in the White House residence.
Oh,
right. But it's not, because then I would just find it way too exhausting. It's not like some political proxy thing where like...
Either this is the second time you've told me this, or the second person to tell me this.
I don't know. There are a lot... She's a bird watcher who is also the like best detective in the world. And she comes to solve the murder of a White House usher.
Ooh.
So... It's funny, but there's also enough like whodunit intrigue to kind of it's really well done.
Yeah.
And it is the murder mystery that I did not know that I needed in my life. And so I've been enjoying that.
Love a good murder mystery.
I do too. I mean, I very much came of age with Clue, the movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which I only learned recently, like did very badly, like when it was released as a movie in theaters.
Yes. That's a movie. You should only watch it on cable at 2 PM on a Saturday.
Like, speaking of, I think you can watch it literally anytime.
Well, like it's in that genre of like a movie I saw on Comedy Central one day.
Yeah. Speaking of, like that is a classic example of what we tend to mean by cult favorite. So, I'm a sucker for murder mysteries too.
Yeah.
I like Columbo.
I grew Columbo. I grew up on the Sherlock Holmes PBS.
Oh yeah.
The mystery. Love that. The opening cartoon to mystery I thought was the coolest thing.
Well, yeah. Anyway, so I recommend. Give it a watch.
Mine is I've been watching a lot of TV lately. So, but CSAs, community sponsored agriculture.
Always important to give a shout out to.
I think that CSAs are they're great. There's lots of economic and environmental reasons, et cetera, et cetera. But I also just like the challenge. So like we're on yesterday was we got our second CSA of the spring. And like it's always full of stuff that like we would never buy.
Oh, interesting. Yeah,
and so it's like this challenge of like, all right,
nice
what am I
game to play with yourself?
Right, what are we gonna make with this
puzzle?
When in doubt, it's just like slice it up and roast it. But like, and there's stuff we will use like strawberries and things. But yeah, I think CSAs are a fun challenge to like force you to like cook things you wouldn't normally cook.
Yeah.
So find a good CSA around
out
you.
Local farmers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
doing the hard work.
Yeah, shout out to Snowbend Farm. I think that's what it is.
Snowbend, yeah.
For our CSA.
That's probably where it is. This is a fun conversation, Mike.
Yeah.
About a really dark topic. So
well, that's what most of these are.
Thank you.
I don't think.
Thank you for providing space of light and.
Yeah, you're welcome.
In these dark topical times.
Thanks to everybody for listening.
Yeah. And watching potentially now.
Watching. You can find it. Y'all, there is really good social media content coming.
Listen,
seriously,
you guys.
Seriously, we have learned things. So keep an eye out on the Instagram and on the TikTok, Cult Favorite Pod on both of those. There's a YouTube channel where we actually have videos, not just audio. There's an audio only list if you're one of those people who like uses audio on YouTube, but there's also videos of us hanging out, talking. And then special thanks to the Department of Religious Studies for making all of that possible. And we'll see y'all in a couple weeks.
The end here.
The end.
Do all of it. These sensory extravaganza.
Bye.